grandchildren, and we all went out for a dinner, seafood dinner, and the beach.
Okay.
That was like summer activity.
We can give you the list.
Windershire Beach in Gloucester. It was, got home 11 p.m. It was like late, long day.
You having fun?
We did. And the restaurant we went to was called Woodman's in Gloucester. It's been around for over 100 years. So we were standing in line for Woodman's going right down the sidewalk. And across the street was another seafood place with zero wait.
Yeah, he's here.
Some fresh fish, fresh catch.
Extremely
Catch of the day.
high value.
That's true, absolutely true.
I didn't realize it was a short stay. Look at it, on my shorts.
I thought about that, but you know, it's not a really hot summer day like it was a few days ago. I wore long pants and regular shirt.
I was thinking about it.
I have an identical shirt like this, short sleeve.
Sorry, guys, I'm a few minutes late here.
Okay, I think Adam's almost.
Citizens demands your
I don't know if we're live or not.
We're live tonight.
Live, all
Whenever
right.
you're ready, and he'll start.
All right.
I hope they didn't catch what we were talking.
Oh, that wasn't good.
All right, is everybody ready? I now call to order the June 15th, 2017 meeting of the City of Nashua Planning Board. Mr. Secretary, could we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor Donches, Mike Peterson,
Present.
Adam Barley,
Here.
Scott Leclaire, Ed Weber, here. Alderman Sean McGinnis, Alderman Thomas Lopez, Steve Dukraine,
Present.
Dan Kelly, David Robbins,
Present.
Jerry Rapucci,
Here.
Chanel Mistry, Megan Garkas.
Okay, we have all regular members participating and voting this evening. Next up, we have the approval of the minutes from June 1st. Anyone have any questions or comments on the minutes?
Couple comments. These are just typos. Page 4. First paragraph, several lines down, it says which it's not approved. I think it's which is not, no, it says which it's no approved. That should be not approved. And it should be which is not approved. In a couple lines lower, this is here, this here, this capital I, that should be is. This here is.
Sorry, where is that?
Page 4?
Yep, top of page 4, right?
Right, the first paragraph towards the end of that paragraph.
Oh, got it.
So the word "and" should be not.
Yeah,
Is not.
The word is not.
is not, yeah. That's it.
Any other questions, comments on the minutes? Okay. Take a motion.
Make a motion.
Mr. Weber? Motion to approve,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Robbins. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And abstentions,
I'll abstain also.
2 abstentions. Me and Jared. Okay. Communications, good evening, Roger.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Board. If you turn to your packet, I will go over the items you received after the mailing went out to you. The first item is an amended Planning Board agenda, case number 4, which is linear retail, Nashua, at 221 and 225 Daniel Webster Highway is withdrawn. You have a letter in your, later on here I'll reference. On case number 3, which is 7 Deerwood, which is before you tonight, you have 3 communications. One is a letter from Gene Walker with the comments. Another is from the Delaney Group concerning the case, as well as the last one's from the Delaney Group as well. You should review those when the item comes up. And of course, the last item is, as I referenced, Vets would withdraw a letter for case number 4. And that's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Reporter of Committee and Liaison. Mr. Weber, anything to report?
Nothing.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now read the procedure for this evening's meeting. After the legal notice of each conditional special use permit, site plan, or subdivision plan is read by the chair, the board will determine if the application is complete and ready for the board to take jurisdiction. The public hearing will begin, at which time the applicant or representative will be given time to present an overview and description of their project. They shall speak to whether or not they agree with the recommended staff stipulations. The board will then have an opportunity to ask relevant follow-up questions of the applicant or staff. The chair will then ask for testimony from the audience. First, anyone wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan may speak. Please come forward to the microphone and state your name and address for the record. This will be the time to express your concerns or ask questions you may have regarding the plan. Next, testimony will come from anyone wishing to speak in favor of the plan. The applicant will then be given a rebuttal period, at which time they should respond to any concerns raised by prior public testimony. One public member will then be allowed to respond to only those items brought forth during the applicant's rebuttal period. After this has been completed, the public hearing will end and the board will resume the public meeting, at which time the board will deliberate and vote on the application before us. We ask that both sides keep their remarks to the subject at hand and to not repeat what has already been said. We want to be fair to everyone and make the best possible decision based on the testimony presented and considering the all applicable approval criteria established in the National Revised Ordinances. Thank you for your interest and courteous attention. I ask you please turn off your cell phones at this time. Old business conditional special use permits, none. Old business subdivision plans, none. Old business site plans, case number 1 is tabled to the July 13th, 2017 meeting. New business conditional special use permits, none. New business subdivision plans. Case number 2, Gallon R. LaRose, trustee of the MAL Realty Trust owner, Trafalgar Square Realty Trust of 2012 applicant. Application and acceptance of proposed dedication of land to Manchester Street right-of-way and 3-lot subdivision. Property is located at 135 and L Manchester Street. Sheet 56, lots 2 and 21, zoned urban residence, and this is located in Ward 3. As to case number 2, can I have a motion this application is complete and ready for the board to take jurisdiction?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Rapucci. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Peterson. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Tom Zajac. I'm a civil engineer with Hayner Swanson, 3 Congress Street here in Nashua. Here tonight representing Trafalgar Square Realty Trust of 2012. We're here tonight seeking a 4-lot subdivision on a property located at 135 Manchester Street. Also with me here tonight is Attorney Jerry Prunier. If you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to give a brief presentation on the project, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions you or the board has.
Please.
So as shown on the subdivision plan on your screen or on the board, The subject parcels are map 56, lots 2 and 21. They're combined about 1.5 acres in size. The site is located off Manchester Street in the RA zoning district. The property is abutted by Manchester Street to the west and on all sides by single-family homes. A single-family home and barn exist on the southerly side of the property of Lot 2 with a paved driveway out onto Manchester Street. The remainder of Lot 2 is wooded or lawn area. Lot 21 is undeveloped and wooded. There are no wetlands on the property. NRCS soil mapping indicates sandy soils. The topography of the site is divided in half, with half draining in a southwesterly direction towards Manchester Street and half draining in a northeasterly direction towards the existing residence off of Southfield Drive. There is a bituminous sidewalk currently along both sides of the street on Manchester Street. As I mentioned, we're here tonight proposing to subdivide Old Lot 2 into 3 new single-family road frontage lots. Lot 21 will also be developed as a single-family road frontage lot and will keep its current property configuration. The existing house and barn on the property will be raised. All 4 lots meet or exceed the minimum dimensions of the RA zone. In fact, the lot areas range from 14,000 square feet to 18,000 square feet, where a minimum of 7,500 square feet is required. The new homes will have approximately 1,500 square foot footprint, which is consistent with the neighborhood. All lots will have new driveways and utility services off of Manchester Street. Lots will be serviced by public sewer, water by Pennachuck, underground gas, and overhead electric and telecommunications services. During the time of our survey, it was found that there's an inconsistency in the Manchester Street right-of-way along our frontage. Originally, Manchester Street was laid out and accepted by the city as a 60-foot right-of-way. However, we found no record of this taking. As a result, the sidewalk along our frontage is actually located outside of the right-of-way and within our property. As part of this project, we are proposing a street dedication along the entire frontage of these 2 properties in order to provide the city a minimum right-of-way width of 50 feet. Additionally, our survey revealed that certain abutters to the north and east have constructed fences and a swing set that slightly encroach upon our property. I just wanted to point this out because you'll see it on the plan. The applicant will certainly work with these abutters directly outside of this meeting to resolve any issues there. Just wanted to touch upon a couple key project elements. Manchester Street roadway work. So as I mentioned, each of these 4 lots will gain access and also be serviced by utilities within Manchester Street. Manchester Street was paved last year and is currently under the 5-year moratorium. Therefore, any disturbance to the roadway will require approval from the Board of Public Works. The applicant, who purchased the property last year, was unaware of this requirement or that the street was newly paved when they bought the property. So we will be requesting from the Board of Public Works the proposed work as shown on our plan. The street will be resurfaced along the entire frontage of the property, and therefore we believe will have minimum long-term impact on the roadway. The project is on the Board of Public Works agenda for next week for this request. Street addresses. So there's an issue with assigning new street addresses. Typically, street addresses will be reserved for undeveloped properties, which was not the case here. The existing Lot 2, the bigger lot, is currently listed as 135 Manchester Street. Existing Lot 21, being undeveloped, does not have a current address. Our abutter to the south is listed as 133 Manchester Street, and our abutter to the north is listed as 137. So we really have no leftover numbers to use. Now, unfortunately, the easiest solution is to change the address of our abutter to the north from 137 Manchester Street to 134, thus allowing these 4 lots to be 135, 137, 139, and 141 Manchester Street. As you know, any change in street addresses requires the Board of Aldermen approval. The applicant will go through this process if he's granted subdivision approval tonight. In terms of stormwater, as I mentioned, there's 2 main watersheds to the property, both draining to Manchester Street and Southfield Drive. Runoff in both locations enters a public drainage system that eventually discharges into a swale located on the Pennachuck Junior High School property to our north. We're proposing to utilize the sandy soils present on the property for the recharge of our runoff. The site has been graded in the rear yards as such that they will drain to a northerly direction towards the lowest part of the property near Southfield Drive, where a leaching catch basin is to be installed. That's shown on the lot grading plan on the right side of the board. And I can flip to that here on the screen. The front yards and driveways have been graded to direct runoff to a low point on each lot where a leaching catch basin will be installed. Due to these drainage improvements, our calculations show that the post-development runoff leaving the site will be less than or equal to the existing condition. Therefore, it is our opinion that the project meets the stormwater regulation outlined in the land use code. Mr. Chair, we are asking for 1 waiver here tonight. If you don't mind, I'd just like to paraphrase the letter dated May 26, 2017. The waiver request is section 190-221 for overhead utility services. So there's an existing overhead utility line and poles located on the opposite side of Manchester Street. All the homes in this neighborhood are all serviced via overhead utilities. We did meet with the utility company, and what we will be proposing is to service these 4 homes via overhead services from 2 new poles located on the opposite side of the street. Allowing this project to be serviced by overhead utilities will be well within the character of the neighborhood and will not require the applicant to incur additional construction costs associated with underground wiring across the right-of-way. So in summary, we believe the application is complete and conforms to the land use code subdivision regulations. The recommended conditions in the staff report are acceptable to our client, and we respectfully seek your approval tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you just point out for me where those utility poles are and where the connections are being made?
Where the what? I'm sorry.
Where you said that the utilities would be connected from, did you say 2 new poles that would be across the street?
There's a couple poles located along the westerly side of the street. The new poles are not shown on the plan. Those will be set by the utility company.
Okay. But there would be 2 poles then for each lot? I mean, 1 pole for each lot? Or for
Correct.
2 lots?
Correct.
Sorry. Okay. Questions?
I have a question, and it's not really a loaded one. It's just of my lack of understanding of this. But when you're talking about underground utilities, would it be an option to place 1 pole on the same side of the street as these houses? Bring the power to that pole, and then from that pole, not crossing Manchester Street with overhead wires, but then from that pole, put everything underground. And so that the requirement of the ordinance is complied with. The reason I'm asking you that is because the reason for that ordinance, my understanding of it, is that it's better to have them underground, it's weatherproof, and you just have a more reliable system. So it's kind of hard for me to look at it and say we should just waive it because it was put there for a reason. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. If it's not the reason I think it is, tell me, because I don't claim to be an expert on this. I'm just thinking to myself, if the city wants the utilities on new construction to go underground, there's an alternative between running underneath Manchester Street and just running put up two poles that are gonna affect the people across the street. Right now, those people are gonna have new poles in front of their house. So what do you think of what I'm asking you?
Well, in terms of what we talked about with the utility company, essentially you would need to set new poles to then run underground to transformers to then into the houses. So I think you'd be setting two poles on the other side of the street. But I would have to speak with the utility company about that specifically. Certainly you'd be looking at two transformers on that side of the street. In terms of the regulation itself, I think when I read it, I think of a new construction, new road, new subdivision, having all underground utilities. You know, when you have a piece of property that's located within an established neighborhood and every other house is serviced by overhead utilities, I don't think it negatively affects the character of the neighborhood to service, you know, new lots that are kind of infill lots with keeping in character with the rest of the neighborhood. So that's how I would look at that.
That sounds right, thanks.
Mr. Weber? You have two retaining walls on the plans on the uh, 146.
I brought a pointer, do you want to use it?
What? No,
brought-
I know, thank you. It shows you're gonna have two retaining walls, correct?
Yes, coming off the side of that house.
Okay. What I'd like to make sure that your engineer who's gonna design this, when it's completed, that he comes out and signs off on it. Not just does it on the plans, pass it on to the contractor, and then he does that. I was gonna put a stipulation in there, because that happens constantly before this engineer does it, but it never gets inspected by the engineer.
Yeah, typically there's a shop drawing submittal stamped by a professional engineer here in New Hampshire. I'm not sure if that's required for retaining walls. We do have a note on there of it being under 4 feet. So it would essentially be more of a landscape or sitting wall.
Oh, okay.
Rather than a retaining wall with a fence and tiebacks and all that stuff.
Okay, if it's nothing big that you don't have to, that's fine.
It's just to kind of help make up grade on that side of the house, so
Yeah.
there's not steep slopes along that property line.
Yeah. What's gonna be happening, are the big granite blocks that are on the property, are they gonna be gone, taken out, or are they gonna stay?
Which granite blocks are those?
On the front of your property, there's huge granite blocks next to the sidewalk. Kinda hard to see, but I was out there, and
Okay.
they're about 1 foot by 1 foot by 4 foot. They're huge.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the blocks you're talking about. Not the curb, not the back of the curb.
Not the curb
Granite.
that's on the street, it's on the sidewalk, and then on on the inside property, it's just a gigantic block there from the edge of the sidewalk. There's an existing,
I'm gonna guess it's gonna be removed.
okay? I don't know if the city would like those, because sometimes granite's, it's just hard to come by. I was just wondering, it's just an oddity that it's gigantic. They're big, big blocks. They probably could be sold easily. That was it.
Engineer DeGrant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to lot 146, looking at the grading plan, you mentioned that the encroachment was going to be taken care of, meaning that they're going to be removed? Because
I think that's a discussion between the owner, the property owner, and the abutter.
See, because these will be individual lots when they're
Correct.
done.
Correct.
If you look at the grading plan, you know, the grading ends right at the fence, the encroaching fence, and your building setback is right there. So it does kind of limit how you're going to position your building.
Yeah, I think that's, again, something that needs to be worked out. If it's, you know, I don't think those abutters purposely encroached. It's just the nature of the woods and kind of the natural setback that has been there for years. You know, perhaps installed a fence or put a swing set or, you know, a little bit over their property line. So, you know, we only found out about it when we went to survey it.
Right.
We've made the property owner aware of it.
The reason why I'm thinking along that line, because if we are going to allow the fence to be there, wouldn't that affect the building setback? Because the building setback is for a purpose. If you know, we're gonna say that fence now represents, you know, technically what the property line is, then wouldn't this building setback be adjusted? I would think so. I mean, staff can weigh in on that.
Well, there is no setback for a fence. They can go right on the property line, but that's really not gonna affect setbacks, you know, the fence. I think Mr. Zajac stated that they're gonna probably work with the abutters to clear this up, and the board could always put that as a stipulation if they wanted to, but a fence on their property line isn't gonna affect their setback.
No, I'm looking at the reason for a setback is to allow a space.
Right.
If you have a fence that's just a few feet from, say, a structure, then, to me, you know, you're not fulfilling the purpose of the setback.
Well, I mean, the fence, you know, your setback, if it's a shed, is gonna be 6 feet from the property line in the rear. Whether there's a fence, say, 3 feet in or not, it's not gonna make a difference. It's from the setback itself, not from the actual, where they put the fence. So,
The areas where the fence are, so there's a wood fence encroachment along lot 22 to the north. And then there's a little bit of encroachment with some fence and maybe a swing set in the rear of the property off the abutters off of Southfield. So,
Right.
I would say that the fence encroachment on lot 22 is maybe the more impactful in terms of getting anywhere close to buildings. Though I would say that the encroachment is in the rear of the property, and as I said, these lots are nearly double or more the minimum required lot size. So I'm expecting all these structures, though they could be built all the way in the back of the property
They
to
could
be
be.
to be closer to Manchester Street as we've represented. So
Yeah.
I also think that specifically with that lot owner, I don't know if they're here tonight or not, but we will be having discussions with them about the street address. There's certain provisions in the Board of Aldermen process where if they consent, then there's no public meeting for that address change, and if they don't, then there's a public meeting. So I'm guessing we're going to be reaching out to them very shortly to talk about the address change. So I'm sure there's a reasonable solution on the fence as well.
Okay. Staying with the grading plan, looking at the backyards, it's pretty flat, but it points down northwards so that you have a drainage structure in the lot 146 where you're going to capture all that runoff. Would there be an easement between the owners to have that drainage flow from one lot through the succeeding lots to get to that drainage basin?
We were not proposing any, no. I think it's gentle of enough of a slope where kind of all the backyards will drain in that direction. Naturally, it's not as if we're concentrating a swale or specific drainage way that needs to be protected there. So, no, we did not propose any drainage easements back there.
Yes. Sometimes that runs into problems in the future where, say, the lowest lot decides that he wants to do something, build up his yard, and the guys that, upstream of him have impounded water. I've seen that happen, so that's a caution right there. Going back to Mr. Rapucci's question of the underground utilities, you said that the intent of the law, I guess you indicated that the intent is pretty much looking at character, neighborhood character. Everybody's overhead, so why not this one? Well, I'm not sure if that's the case. You know, there's reference made to, you know, protecting the overhead from inclement weather and so on. But then I was reading your letter, which you said you were going to paraphrase, and said that our client met with a representative of Eversource, and they determined that the best way to service the 4 new lots would be by overhead wires. What does best mean there? You probably didn't write it, did you?
What's that?
You probably didn't write that.
I don't think my name's at the bottom of that, no.
Okay.
I think best there means that that's, you know, probably the most efficient and most cost-effective solution. I did not personally meet with the Eversource representative, so I can't tell you what the detailed discussion was there, whether they thought it was, which side of the street was a better spot for the poles. I don't think there's any poles along that side of the street now, so I don't know if they prefer to keep all their poles on one side of the street and not kind of hop back and forth. So that's what they were proposing to as the best way to, or most efficient way, if you want to use a different word, to service these lots. And in terms of the intent of the ordinance, I would say that is my interpretation of it and a justification for asking for the waiver.
Yeah, and no, we see a lot of requests for waivers, and I talked about them a lot, that we don't want to just rubber stamp waiver requests. But, you know, I don't think applicants should just write anything that comes to mind or what sounds easy and would be accepted by the board. I think the last time you presented another subdivision, we talked about the same thing. We had overhead wires going across one lot onto another. And, you know, I don't think people like that. So I think that in itself is probably one of the reasons that the ordinance was crafted, you know. And that neighborhood too, that I'm remembering, I think it was all overhead. But to me, the justification of pushing to get underground there would have been so you don't have that encroachment of your wire on the neighbor's property. So there might be several reasons to want underground. In this case, I thought it was doable. I think we have another item tonight, and I think they will be putting underground, and I don't think in that entire area is all underground either. So I think it can be done, just some effort has to be made to do so. Thank you.
Other questions for the applicant?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern to this plan? If so, please come forward. Just ask that you state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mark Cleveland, and I am at 5 Southfield Drive. I have 2 questions. One has to do with the possibility of blasting, which is mentioned in one of the plans here. How is that undertaken? How are neighbors alerted to that process? And how does one protect oneself from the effects of neighborhood blasting? And the second question I have has to do with the plans with houses illustrated on the lots. Am I to understand that those are proposed placements, or are they part of the lot development plan?
So,
In other words, are they fixed placements, or is there a possibility for revision and change?
so taking your second question first.
Yes.
Because this is a subdivision plan, we're only approving the subdivision plan, so the placement of the houses that is shown is proposed.
Okay,
It's not, they would not be obligated to place them in that particular location necessarily. Although, as the applicant indicated, it sounds like they would be more likely than not to place them further towards Manchester Street. As to the blasting, I'll let the applicant address the specifics of this plan, what their expectations are with respect to blasting. But there is a formal permitting process, I think it's with is it with the
Fire department.
fire department, where they would have to go and get a permit from the fire department, and they would have to go through that process separately from what we do here tonight.
Yes, I see, okay. So my concern should be addressed to the fire department.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's is there a formal notice process?
There is, and I'm not sure how many, it's within so many feet, but they do what they call a pre-blast survey, where they would come out, and check the area. I think they even either photograph it or videotape it. So if there is any damage after the blasting is done, you'd be able to make a claim on it.
All right, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to speak in opposition? Please come forward. Again, just state your name and address for the record, please.
Hello, Chairman and Council. My name is Seth Clement. I live at 9 Southfield Drive. Actually, just, I think, two quick questions. The first being with respect to, where is it here? The possible encroachment from, like, the chain link fence, for example, on my property. Is there a time frame in terms of when the abutters would meet with the contractors, and are there any obligations on either side for that?
So, I'm sorry, so do you have the swing set or the fence that's encroaching?
No, further to the right, behind lot 21. It looks
Okay.
like, I'm guessing, based upon the plan, that my chain link fence probably encroaches by, I can't imagine more than a couple feet, if there is any. I just didn't know if there is any particular, like, time frame in which we're obligated to meet with, with the contractor and the abutters to go over any revisions that would need to be done with respect to if anything needed to be moved. And, that would go for any of us that had, anything encroaching in that area.
Right, I think the short answer is no, there's not a particular time frame or necessarily a particular process. It would really be a discussion between you and the applicant, and I would imagine that as they go through the process, they're gonna reach out to each abutter
Okay.
for whom that's the case. And they would probably propose some sort of resolution, and I don't know what that would be.
Right.
But I don't know that there's there's no formal process in the case of an encroachment
No,
like that, right?
and typically, something like that is a civil matter
Yeah.
between the owners of the property.
Right,
Okay.
right.
The other follow-up question I had to it was more so not so much for myself, but for friends of mine that are actually currently, and maybe this goes to the applicant as well, or just to be aware of, the property at 7 Southfield that's currently occupied by Barry and Denise Coughlin, that is currently pending sale. It's actually being sold to friends of mine that can't be here this evening, and they're closing not until the end of July. So I was curious how that would work from a process of, who the contractor might end up meeting with, and if for any reason they needed to move something, who would that fall upon?
So I think I'll ask the applicant to sort of address maybe a little bit more to both questions, sort of
Sure,
their,
that'd be great.
their proposed timeframe in terms of reaching out to the butters. I think in that particular case, it would probably depend on how soon they would start moving forward, and you said the end of July.
Yeah.
So it may very well be the case that they wouldn't even be at that point until after your friends have closed on the house and moved
Sure.
in. But I will ask them to address that.
Okay, appreciate that. And lastly, I noticed on the larger plan out back for the proposed tree line, it seems like Do you have any idea in terms of about how many feet that is?
Sorry, just because if you don't speak in the microphone.
Okay,
we can't
sorry.
hear.
I
If
was
you
just
speak,
wondering for the-
I'll have them answer
Yeah,
that.
for the proposed tree line, it seemed like on the larger scale back there, there was a proposed kind of tree line that they were going to keep, and I was just hoping they could maybe just address that a little bit.
Sure, like how,
Yeah,
how wide that tree
back
line
it
would
would come, yeah.
Sure.
That's all. Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome.
My name is Louise Murray, and I live at 133 Manchester Street. And the only two questions my husband had were, if you're looking at my house and you're looking at the property we're talking about, there's a whole line of trees, dead wood. Is that all gonna come out? It's a fire hazard over there. And we're a little concerned that, that it is gonna get removed. We've been trying to get the old owner to move it all down before, but nobody wanted to budge. Okay?
Okay, so we'll ask the applicant.
And the other question was, the wires for, I believe it's cable and phone and all that, runs from the corner of our house to the pole across the street, but it crosses over that property. If that has to be moved, is that gonna be our responsibility, our expense?
So, we will ask the applicant what the impact on that particular connection would be, if any. But I think that it would be the utility who would bear that cost, I think. But we'll get confirmation from the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
I'm Paul Cardinal from 137 Manchester Street, and I actually just had a question about what right-of-way is. Like, is that affecting the sidewalk on that side of the street, or?
Yeah,
No,
so
it's-
I think what the issue is that it sounds like the right-of-way where the sidewalk is actually encroaching on the current private property. So essentially, they're giving some of that back to the city to make sure that the city has sufficient right-of-way. It's not changing the physical
Okay.
properties of the sidewalk.
The sidewalk's not gonna go anywhere?
Right.
Okay, my other questions were addressed by the other neighbors, so,
Okay,
thank you very much.
thank you. One more call. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. For the record, my name is Gerald Prunier. I'm an attorney representing the applicant this evening. Taking the last question first, Mr. Cardinals. When the city built the sidewalk, they built it on our property. The intent in this plan is to give it back to the city. So that's part of our plan, is to give it back to the city. We don't want the sidewalk, and that's the reference to it. And the dead wood, I'm sure, whatever doesn't look good, will be taken out in the development of the property, so that each lot looks saleable in a better position. As far as any encroachments are concerned, I think we will look at all of the encroachments one by one, because they all have a little bit different problems. The fence that was discussed by I forgot what his name, I think he's at 9 Southfield Drive.
Mr. Clement?
Yeah, his is very little, and it could be addressed maybe with a license to leave it there until such time as he puts a new one in, which time we can move it. It may not be necessary to move it right now. We could, so there are different ways in which to take care of these encroachments. The wood fences that Mr. Dukran talked about is a little bit different. That encroaches quite a bit upon our property, and we'll have to discuss that, but that is easier to take care of.
And you have a sense of, I know it's gonna be, it may vary for different people, but of how soon you would start that process?
Probably the summer.
Okay.
Summer. We don't want to leave it there, we want to take care of it and get it done. And I think the other questions, the blasting and the house questions were taken care of by staff and by the chairman of the board. Thank you.
Oh, one other question that I think Mrs. Murray had asked. Do you know, is there going to be any effect on that current utility pole and line? And if so, am I correct that it would be the utility that would bear the cost of any movement of that?
I'm not in charge of utilities, so I'm going to bring our engineer,
Okay.
who is, and let him answer the question.
Again, for the record, Tom Zajac, Keener, Swanson. The blasting note is just a standard note that's on our plan. We did test pits out there. We're not anticipating any blasting on the site. In terms of the buffer tree line in the back, so our plan represents about a 25 to 75-foot buffer as you move from north to south. But again, as we've discussed, the purpose of that, of the grading plan with the house locations and driveways is to show that these lots can support these types of homes, and the developer reserves the right to build the house or clear the trees really anywhere in that back area. But, you know, we anticipate these houses being closer to Manchester Street. Nobody wants a really long driveway. So I would expect that the buffer would be something similar to what we're showing on the plan. That would be my guess.
So you said 25 to 75 foot
25
is the range?
on the north side as you're closest to Southfield, and then it looks about 75 feet as you're moving south along that rear property line. Final question was about the existing overhead service to 133 Manchester Street. We didn't show it on our survey, and I do know there's a big tree right at the corner there of Lot 21, which is undeveloped, so I don't know if it crosses the property line or not, but yeah, I would think that would be something that would be addressed by the utility company. Thanks.
Quick question for Mr. Zajac. I have a question about a survey. Now, I shouldn't be questioning a licensed surveyor, but I gotta get this on record. Because,
Surveyor.
because seems that the sidewalk that the city built encroached on the private property, on your property. But in the backside, it seems that the Registry of Deeds has a line that's further into the Southfield Drive area. So it seems that if you were to take everything and push it to line up with that registry information, then the sidewalk will be free and clear. But if you read Mr. Liversidge's notes, he talks about using the maximum error allowed in the minimum precision. So again, I don't know much about surveys, but surveying, but it tells me that there could be some error in this.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for Mr. Liversidge,
Yeah.
who's our surveyor, but I believe these are kind of two separate issues, in that the front is lack of finding, you know, the record of that taking along our property for the right-of-way. And then the back property line, there was a survey done by another firm that he disagreed with that boundary line in the back, which is what you're showing, what we show dashed on our survey plan, so.
Right.
Aside from that, I don't know the details of how that boundary determination was made.
Yeah, I was kind of reacting to Attorney Pruney as, hey, we're giving something away here. But I think Attorney Pruney should also realize, hey, this subdivision doesn't have to build a sidewalk. How about that? So, I think we are even. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I'll just give any folks in the audience the opportunity who spoke before, if there was a question that you had that was not addressed by the applicant's rebuttal testimony right now, if anyone, the four of you, five of you who spoke would like to come forward.
Mr. Dukran, jogged my memory as you were speaking.
Sorry, just if you,
I'm
Paul
sorry,
Cardinal,
Paul
right?
Cardinal, 137 Manchester Street. The surveyors were certainly out, there seemed to be a lot of confusion regarding the surveying, and the reason I'm bringing that up now is because at 137, my fence encroaches the property by the greatest amount of anything that encroaches, and I'm fine with moving it. There's obviously not discourse for like disputing the survey, correct? Because obviously I spoke with the previous homeowner when I put the fence in. I mean, I don't think it'll end up being a big deal. I just wanted to add my 2 cents about the surveyors having, it seemed a great deal of difficulty finding the property lines when they came out. And the second thing I wanted to mention from earlier is, again, to your point about the overhead utilities. Aesthetically, it has no personal effect on me, but it's my impression that a utility company would always want to keep them overhead, because if they're damaged, taxpayers repair them. Whereas if they, you know what I mean, like they get federal funding if they're damaged due to bad weather or state funding. So to your point, why is that the best way to do it? I'd be curious too why that's the best way to do it.
That was it. Thank you. Did the applicant have anything further to add? Does staff have anything to add?
Staff has nothing to add.
Do we have any other questions?
Well, I'm going to have a question of staff.
We can do that during the deliberation. Okay. Any other questions for the applicant?
I just have a point of clarification.
Mr. Peters?
So with the overhead wiring, you would put 2 new poles on the property side of Manchester Street?
Tom Zajac, Hayner Swanson. Yes, that's my understanding of what Eversource is proposing, that they would be setting 2 new poles on the opposite side of Manchester Street. And each pole would service 2 houses via overhead service across the street.
When you say opposite side, I mean the west side of Manchester Street.
Correct. That's where all the poles are now.
So those homeowners over there would have like 2 new poles in front of their house.
2 new poles within the right-of-way.
And if we somehow enforced the ordinance that the underground, how would that work? You'd have to go under the road?
They would likely ask for us to go under the road. I'm not sure if they would need to set a pole or not. They may still need to set those 2 new poles and then run underground to 2 transformer pads on our site, and each of those transformer pads would probably service those 2 lots.
So it's conceivable, you'd still have to put in poles on the west side of the road, then go under, and that sounds,
That would be my guess. I don't know. It was suggested earlier about running 1 line across, setting 1 new pole on our side and feeding from there. I don't know the answer to that.
okay, well, thank you.
Mr. Weber?
When I was out there, there was a pole that's down the street from, it's close to 137, and there's a pole there already that comes off of, across the street that has a transformer on it. And wouldn't it be just as easy to put 1 pole on 146 and connect it to the existing one that's just north of 137 Manchester, and then go underground from there? And now the people on the west side of Manchester have no poles on their properties.
No additional poles.
Right, they wouldn't have any additional poles.
I don't know. I wasn't at that meeting, so I don't know what the different options that were discussed. My guess from dealing with them is they like all their poles on one side of the street. Apparently, they varied from that a
Yeah.
little further down. So I don't know the number of poles that would need to be added if we did have to construct them on our side of the street. My guess would be 2.
Yeah, because there is, let me see, I put where they're at exactly. I marked it because I saw that that was one of my thoughts, that it was going to be a long distance. Oh, okay. One's on lot 143, just below the word, in the word street, it's on the first E, and then the other one's right next to where the E in Manchester is, that's where it's currently now. So, that one, I don't know why they would need two additional ones, but,
There may be too much on those poles already. A lot of times they need to set a new pole for a new transformer.
yeah. I'm just thinking that it's, my thought coming into here tonight, I thought it would be much easier for them to pull one pole on your side and put it on 146, and then go underground from there. That's my thought.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, are we all set? Any more questions for the applicant? Okay. This concludes the hearing on this application. We will now take our deliberations into the public meeting. The board does reserve the right to recall any party for further clarification. So, from what I think we heard from the testimony and from what we heard from the applicant, it strikes me that the only issue really is the utility issue, and whether we would grant the waiver or not. I would say, just in terms of some background on the waiver, I mean, it is my sense that, and I could be wrong about this, but that at least part of the rationale of the ordinance is the idea that having them underground is, that there's less risk, of losing power because of, weather-related events. And having said that, usually when we're considering these waiver requests, we look at the, surrounding neighborhood and say, is everything overhead? And if everything existing is overhead, then we've often granted the waiver, at least in my view, under the theory that, there's a pretty marginal benefit from a reliability perspective in a case like this, to the extent that all the other lines are overhead, and you have one line for just these 4 lots that's buried underground. There's not a whole lot of benefit to that, because everything else is going to remain overhead. I mean, in terms of, other options besides the 2 poles on the opposite side of the street, it seems to me they could potentially explore with the utility whether there are, other feasible options. But ultimately, I don't know that they're going to be able to dictate to the utility, where the poles are going to go. I mean, I would say I would be inclined, under the circumstances here, given that this whole neighborhood is overhead now, so that there's not, as I said, there's sort of a marginal benefit from a reliability perspective, and also a number of poles already, so it's not as if, we're suddenly adding 2 new poles and there's, no poles throughout this neighborhood. I would tend to be inclined, under these circumstances, to grant the waiver. But happy to hear other perspectives on that. Mr. Rapucci?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, not so much like I have a strong opinion about it. I was thinking about it more like the rule makers in Nashua made this rule. And so my question is, why did they make the rule? What was the motive to have this requirement put in place? And I don't know what that motive was. I was speculating. I was just saying what I thought it might be, but I don't know what it is. If I can see the logic of what they really meant to say was, when you're doing a new development, put it all underground. They might have meant to say that, but I don't think they said that. I think what they said was, when there's a new house, or when there's new construction or a new subdivision, do it this way. So I'm more inclined to say, if their intention was for developments, fine. I have no problem with keeping it consistent with the neighborhood. But if there was another intention that I'm just not I'm just ignorant to. I don't know what it was, but somebody thought enough of it to make it a rule. I just don't want to waive that rule without understanding what it is. I know that it's going to be a lot more expensive to put it underground. There's no question about that. So I know if I was building it, I would want to put it overground too, because it's going to be cheaper to do that. My experience with the utility company is they put the poles where they want to put them. Their engineer comes out and says, all right, we're doing this and we're doing that, and nobody has a say in that. Their engineers decide how it's done. When it comes to actually running the electricity, and they have right of ways that just allow them to do that. They don't need our permission, I believe. That's the way it works. So I'm just saying, if the city has a long-term objective, I would like to understand that, so that when we look at these, we're not just rubber stamping it. If the objective is what seems logical, is that when you're doing a big development, do it, then I'm cool with that. So was what I said. I had a question for the planning department. That was kind of my question. What's the goal?
Well, I mean, I honestly don't know what their intent was, and maybe Roger could answer that, because has been here longer, but I know typically when we see these 1, 2, 3 lot subdivisions, it is pretty typical that they ask for a waiver for underground utilities, and they are granted. And typically, when we see big subdivisions come in, they go underground utilities. I don't know if Roger has more, maybe he can shed some light on it since he was here at the time.
Yeah, basically, I think the land use committee, I think, Steve, you were on that as well, and I'm trying to recall. My intent was to have utilities put underground, and then if there's waiver provisions in the code where it makes sense to keep it overhead. There's aesthetic reasons to put it underground. There's also, service outage too, that you have less of that and you don't have to worry about lines falling across Manchester Street in this case, or on private property. But it's primarily a case-by-case decision by the planning board, weighing the facts of what you feel, is this appropriate or not. I think Chairman Varley did express his thoughts on this, and it's something the board should discuss and weigh those issues. It's typically on, when you're building a new street, your street lights and your utilities are all underground. And it's not just electric lines, it's cable and other lines, So I know that's not giving you a direct answer, but it was put in place and with the meaning that things do be put underground, but there are exceptions, and you have to weigh what your exceptions may be in this particular case.
Yeah, just to add on to Roger just said, to your point, Jerry, the Board of Aldermen at some point decided to put this ordinance into place. And, I think as best as we know, as Roger said, that those were the objectives were, partially aesthetic and partially, sort of reliability of the service. But those same individuals who put this rule into place also gave us the discretion, to waive it where we think it's appropriate to do so. So again, I view it from the perspective of, are we serving those objectives here, and do we have a reasonable basis for granting the waiver? And so, in my view, this would not be the circumstances where we're rubber stamping it. I do think we're having a discussion about whether the waiver is appropriate under these circumstances. And I think that's entirely within the proper role for this board, is to decide, is the waiver appropriate here? And if we think it is, then I don't think that's rubber stamping. I think that's making a determination in our discretion that it's appropriate to grant the waiver, so.
Yeah, I didn't mean anything negative about rubber stamping. I didn't mean it like with a negative connotation. I just meant, if they made a rule, I'd like to know why they made the rule, that's all. It's not, they can, if they put the effort into putting that into the ordinance, it could be something as simple as engineering standards throughout the country have moved towards that. So in order to stay in compliance with the way that the regulators want things done, they did it. That might have been the motive, who knows? But if there's no clear-cut case where the planning department says, no, we want everything underground, then I'm cool with this. I don't want it to go underground. I just wanted to understand why we had the rule. So I'm good with the way it is proposed. I grant the waiver, no problem for me.
Mr. Chair, my input is this. First, I would say, I don't blame the applicant nor engineer for applying for this waiver. And it's simply because it has been done so many times before. Whereas we don't like to use the rubber stamp, it is what we're doing because we know as a board, we've done it. We know this is what works. You know, we've seen this before. If it's worked 3 dozen times before in the last few years, then why not this one? I think what Mr. Puccio is getting back to is trying to understand why it was there in the first place. And I think that's a good goal. I think we should try to do that because it's not just underground utilities, it's the height of lighting, the number of light poles, or the one we see often is that the breaking up parking bays to have, you know, vegetated medians, and several others. And the bottom line is cost. It does save the applicant money. We know that. And it does say in his request for the waiver, it does say, it says it here, will not require the applicant to incur additional construction costs. You know, no one's thinking about the aesthetics, or no one is thinking about the complications. It's just the cost. The cost is what really matters here, and for most requests. And I think we sympathize, because why would it put them through this extra cost if we don't have to? But there's a practical side to the overhead utilities. I've been in the city for a long time. I've been through my share of, you know, ice storms and snowstorms, like Snowtober. And you have, those times you have a lot of lines down. And the city staff gets involved, going around and identifying. Now, these are all private utilities, but the city staff gets involved because the utility companies are all, you know, doing all the repairs and so on. They don't have the time to go out and identify. People don't have phone hookups. They can't make the calls to the utility company. And so the city is going around. I've done it myself. I've driven around the city, identifying. And each house you're looking, telephone down, cable down, electric down. And you keep driving around. And you know how these companies operate, especially the electrical companies. They have to go in, strategically go in certain areas. They can set this area back together and then another area. And you have to keep going back and find out who has restored service and who don't. So there's a practical side of this. If you have an underground, we don't have to worry about you. You're all set. Even though it's just 4 of them, 4 homes being all set it could make a difference in the neighborhood. It could. I've been through it a number of times. So that's the practical side of it. Again, I don't blame the applicant for coming in and asking for it because they know it's easy. The waiver is easy to get.
And again, I would just say, I don't view this, at least from my perspective, as a situation where I'm saying, well, we've granted it in the past, so let's just grant it again. I don't particularly care about the facts and circumstances. I view this as I'm looking at the facts and circumstances here, and on that basis, considering, you know, the objectives of the regulation and whether those will be served, it is reasonable to grant the waiver here. And you know, again, to the practical situation, you know, those 4 lots are still going to be getting the overhead from somewhere, you know, initially. So I still think it's a marginal benefit in terms of whether you're really protecting this small section of the neighborhood, you know, from an outage. So again, looking at the facts and circumstances of this particular case, I think that you know, it's reasonable to grant the waiver, so. Were there any other issues that anyone wanted to raise before we consider a motion?
Is number 2 still June 6th?
Yes.
I'll make a motion.
Mr. Weber?
I'll write it down, too. I'd like to make a motion finding, let's see. Owner applicant, Tevra Square Realty and Trust, 2012. Location at 135 and L Manchester Street. Finding the site plan does meet NRO 190, 138G. The first waiver is granted and will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation. 2 through 6 as written.
Okay, motion by Mr. Weber is to approve new business number 2, finding that it does meet the requirements outlined in site plan NRO section 190-138G. The total of 6 stipulations, the first being a waiver request, reading is granted, will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation, and 2 through 6 is written in the staff report. Is there a second to that motion?
Second?
Seconded by Mr. Peterson. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Have a good evening.
Case number 3, or, sorry, new business site plans, case number 3, 75 Deerwood Drive LLC owner. Application and acceptance of proposed amendment to NR 2191 to construct 8 residential townhomes. Property is located at 7 Deerwood Drive, Sheet H, Lot 133, zoned Park Industrial and General Business, and this is located in Ward 2. As to case number 3, can I have a motion this application is complete and ready for the board to accept jurisdiction?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Robbins, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rapucci. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Oh, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry. My name is Peter Dolph. I'm the president of Sequel Development and Property Management here in Nashua. First of all, let me somewhat apologize. Paul Delaney is our civil engineer, and Paul is traveling with his family this week. David Romero is our PE professional engineer. David's unfortunately suffering some very ill health and likely will stop working, so he was supposed to be here tonight, but at the last minute just couldn't make it. So I am a stand-in for the 2 engineers. I am obviously the owner and developer of the project. The current lot located at 7 Deerwood Drive is a 7/10 of an acre lot. Currently, it's an overgrown vacant lot. The lot is very level and made up of very sandy soils. It's bordered on one side by the Bank of America on Amherst Street, and it's bordered on the other side by a daycare school, entry-level school. The zoning originally approved an 8-unit residential project on this site, but we had to do quite a bit of work with the fire department, and in order to develop a hammerhead that was sufficient to turn around their largest piece of apparatus, as you can see on the plans you're looking at, we had to develop a pretty large hammerhead, and we had to eliminate 1 unit, so we've reduced it from the approved 8 units down to 7 units. So 7 units is what we're going to be building here. The site does allow for 21 parking spots for the 7 units. There are 2 spots in front of each unit, and there's 1 spot in the garage of each unit. So there are 3 parking spots per unit, so that does significantly exceed the parking requirements for this area. Additionally, our buildings all fall within the setbacks and meet all requirements from, this is actually a split zone lot as well. It's half in a park industrial, half in a GB lot, but we meet all of the requirements of both zonings. Mercifully, utility poles run on our side of the street. All of our utilities will be underground, so we do meet we are not asking for a waiver. I think some of the original staff reports showed that we were looking for a waiver, and we are not. All of our utilities will be underground. All of our stormwater will be handled on-site as well. As I say, it is a relatively, it is a very flat lot. As you can see from the drainage reports, it pitches to 2 sets of catch basins, one in the back corner of the hammerhead and one out by the entry driveway. There are 2 catch basins by the entry and 2 in the back corner of the hammerhead. Both of those catch basins filter into their own infiltration system, so they'll be managed underground. And additionally, we have infiltration systems that tie into the roof gutters, so all the roof drainage comes off the building and drains into infiltration systems on the property. So there should be virtually no stormwater running off of our site. This also obviously meets with the city's regulations. We will be constructing sidewalks on Deerwood Drive. There are currently sidewalks in front of the bank, and then it stops for the 7 Deerwood, which is now a vacant lot. The sidewalks start up again in front of the daycare center, and then new sidewalks were just recently built in front of 73, 75, and 77 Deerwood. So as we fill in this lot and build out this lot, we'll be constructing the sidewalks in the front, so you'll now have contiguous sidewalks from Amherst Street down past 77 Deerwood Drive. Again, we are seeking no waivers for this project. Everything, to the best of my knowledge, meets the city's requirements. I know there are 2 minor things we need to add to the plans. Our engineer, Paul Delaney, was trying to catch up with the latest pavement repair schematics that we need to use on Deerwood, and he was not able to get it for tonight. He was working with Gene Walker on that, but certainly that'll be added to the plans, and we'll repair Deerwood to the city's latest regulations on that. And there was some language about a waiver for buffering in front of the utility pad, the transformer, and we're not requesting that. We will have landscaping that will exceed the city's requirements in front of all the utilities. And lastly, I hung a couple of pictures. Just kind of fortunate, we just finished the project at 73, 75, 77 Deerwood. The buildings we're going to be building are extremely similar. The project's going to look extremely similar. Instead of being 14 units, it'll be 7 units, but it'll have very much the same characteristic and the same look. And I imagine many of you folks, if you went out and looked at 7 Deerwood, probably drove down the street and saw us wrapping up this project. So you have a pretty good idea of exactly what we'll be building on that site. With that, I will wrap it up.
Okay, thank you. Just, and this is sort of a question for both you and for staff, because as it stands, the staff report indicates a request for 3 waivers, and I know you indicated that utilities are going to be underground, so I don't know if the waiver request is still necessary because there's some overhead connection, and then there were also 2 waiver requests in the report regarding traffic report, and also says showing mechanical equipment pads, so it doesn't sound like it's necessarily screening, but maybe showing on the plan.
I can clarify a few items for you right now. We can eliminate the request for the first waiver, number
Okay.
1. Number 2, we still left that in as a waiver for traffic, and they did submit that traffic report. Number 3 can be eliminated as a waiver.
Okay. All right, so we're just dealing with number 2 then, just the traffic report.
Could I address that, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, please.
I do have an email from Wayne Husband that essentially says that our project does not meet the minimum size requirement to require a
traffic report or a traffic waiver. We're below the minimum. I'm not sure if the staff was copied on that.
Is the issue that they didn't do the one pager, right?
Right, typically, they would submit it's
Two-page.
just two little pages, and it shows that they don't rise to the threshold of a full traffic study. We just wanted them to fill that in, just so it shows that they don't require a full traffic study. And I think there's just a waiver in there, which still stands for that, so they're asking for that to be waived.
Right, so that would be a waiver of the completion of that basic worksheet.
So that's something we would have our engineer complete as soon as he returns to town. And
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chair, in that case, it's not a waiver. It should make it a condition that is submit.
Right, then it should be a condition of
The
approval.
worksheet.
that they
Right, yeah,
submit
that's
prior
that's
to-
what it sounds like,
That's
it'll
what
be
it sounds, yeah.
submitted. So I think we can eliminate, we can change that from a waiver into a condition. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Other questions for the applicant? Mr. Weber?
When I was looking at, the sidewalks didn't show any handicap ramps, so that'd be minor, that would come under minor drafting,
No, the sidewalks would be constructed to the current specifications and ADA requirements. So
Yep.
they would absolutely have the handicap ramps and the tip downs. And again, we did it up the street and we would do it there. It's just part of what you have to do now.
Okay, and I only have one big concern. When I went out there the other day, right next door to it is a daycare.
Yep.
And I have concerns that I don't know how it's handled, but a registered sex offender purchased, he shouldn't be able, he or she would not be able to be rent or own property or apartment. Now, you are saying that on 11, in the event a property is decided to place under condominium ownership, I would stress that that should be in that document, that it can't be sold, leased, subrented to, right, because of the distance it is
Yep.
to that. That's my only concern, that you guys take note of that. When
Yeah, I don't know that's something they could put into the condo documents.
It's actually, I talked to legal yesterday.
You talked to Corporation
Legal
Counsel?
Corporation Counsel, and they said we can put a stipulation into that.
How would that be enforced?
Yeah,
I'm just saying, I think it's important. I think maybe the police department would, or, have their own, but I'm just saying they should be noted of that, the sensitivity.
I don't think you could prohibit, I don't think that's right. I don't think you could prohibit somebody from occupying a house with it. I don't think there's any, I'm not aware of sort of a distance
It is.
requirement. I mean, there's obviously a registration requirement and a notice requirement.
They
but-
can't even stay within 2,000 yards.
Okay, but if they can't, if there's a requirement as far as them being a registered sex offender goes, and they violate that requirement, then they're in violation of the sex offender registry. I don't know how you would transfer that to the responsibility of a landlord to make sure that somebody isn't breaking the law. You know what I mean? How would you enforce that?
Yeah.
How would a landlord police it on his own? I don't know
Well, the
how
only
that would
way,
work.
what I was hoping for or looking for is if there's a document on that it's placed in their condominiums, that any tenant or leasing, that person who leased that property can't sublease it or rent it out to that, or they, because of the sensitivity right next to it.
Yeah, again, I mean, I guess along the lines of what Mr. Pucci just said, but then, I mean, if there's an explicit requirement under national ordinances that would prohibit a registered sex offender from living within a certain distance of a school, daycare, et cetera, it sounds like, as Mr. Pucci said, in violation. I mean,
Okay.
I mean, we can talk about it further when we go into deliberation, but I would just be concerned about putting that on an individual, particularly in the case of a sublease, where then you basically be putting an obligation on that individual, I guess, would to perform a background check or something.
Yeah, okay. It just came to my thought process that it's right next door to it. It's kind of red flag.
Yeah.
That's all I had.
Other questions, the applicant?
Yeah, so you referenced the restoration, the street restoration requirements as stated by Engineer Walker.
Yes.
Now, apparently we don't have an answer, but it'll be good to know whether there is concurrence that those requirements will be followed.
Those requirements will be followed.
Will be followed.
The only, we just couldn't get our hands on, they're not on your website yet. We couldn't download them and add them to these plans, but once we get a hold of them, we will add them to the plans and they will be followed. There's no question of that.
It may be on the website, it's just that it's
I
probably,
didn't personally search.
probably
it.
difficult to
Our
find.
engineer said he couldn't find them, so,
Yeah.
but, no, we always have and we will follow those plans once we add them to them. To be clear on the previous discussion, this is gonna be a condominium association, so I think, Mr. Chair, you're correct. The federal fair housing regulation is gonna drive a lot of the way the condo docs are written, and then RSA 356B here in the state of New Hampshire would weigh in as well, but there is limits to what we can do as a developer to prohibit further people from living in the unit once it's sold. But to the extent that we can protect the school, absolutely we will.
I'm also reading the other comment from Engineer Walker about the asphalt berms along your drive.
Yes.
Any intention to change them to something that's more durable?
I think the concession we came to that I believe Paul and Engineer Walker agreed to, slope granite will be used, of course, along the street. We're going to continue granite curb into our project through the radius, and we're going to carry the granite curb beyond our catch basins so that for drainage purposes, the granite's always there, and we'll make sure it's there. And then we will transition to an asphalt berm within the property. But in the back corner where the second set of catch basins is, we will put, again, slope granite in that whole corner to protect that catch basin and make sure it works appropriately. And then we will use asphalt berms for the other areas. It's a relatively small property. It's going to be plowed by pickup trucks, with light plows, not heavy city plows and backhoes and the bigger equipment. So the asphalt will stand up better, but we are going to use the slope granite through the radiuses and well into the property.
Okay. Let me ask staff a question here. This doesn't qualify as a private street? You
We
know,
actually had this discussion at
Oh,
our
you did?
technical review meeting. I think we came to the conclusion that it was a driveway. It's a private driveway. It's not a street. It's not being a private street. It's not being named. It's already 7 Deerwood. And then it's going to have, I believe, like A, B, C, D for numbering. So it's not a private street. It's a driveway.
And the reason for that questioning is private streets are required to be constructed using the city standards.
I understand.
Okay. All right, that's all I have.
Other questions? Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern? Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the plan? Staff have anything else to add?
Yes, a few more edits to the recommendations. On item 6, the date of the letter changes from April 18th, 2017 to June 12th, 2017, and that was in your packet tonight. Number 10 can be eliminated, and number 11 can stand and just add before the first CO at the end of that sentence. So it would read, to indicate that we need the condo documents before the first CO. And I'm sure they'll have them before that time. That would be it.
I have a question for Scott.
Sure.
Scott, you wrote a staff report on the project description, the third paragraph. Is that an error?
Which one's that?
The third paragraph, in the event it is determined that,
Well, at the time, before, we didn't have that information, so when I wrote the staff report, I still hadn't received any idea.
no, I
where-
understand what happened. I'm just
Yeah.
asking you, you said,
Oh, I got you.
should that be underground overhead?
They're gonna be underground, yeah, so that should probably be edited as well, yeah, let's see.
No.
No?
Without knowing what's happened today.
Oh, okay.
When you initially wrote the report, was that an error? Should that word be underground or overhead? You read it again and see if that's.
Okay, let me read, okay. I think the reason that was put in there at the time, and hopefully I'm answering the question, but was in case, because the abutters had already gone out and things, wanted to be able to cover every avenue in case there was, any questions on a particular one. Does that help? I'm probably not answering that.
Oh, maybe I don't understand the intent of the sentence, so.
Yeah.
I think you just,
Yeah.
not to butt into it, but I think that would read correctly if it said underground utilities instead of overhead utilities.
That's
Oh.
what-
I think it's just a misstatement,
yeah.
but it's not relevant
It's not relevant anymore, I just want.
because it's not required anymore.
So we can just eliminate that? That's fine.
You just got the term backwards.
It threw me.
Oh, okay,
for-
sorry about
for a
that.
bit, yeah.
Any other questions for the applicant? This concludes the hearing on this application. We'll now take our deliberations into the public meeting. The board does reserve the right to recall any party for further clarification. So we've got a bunch of changes to the stipulations here.
Right.
So, 1 and 3 can just be eliminated totally. 2, we're gonna change from a waiver request into a condition that the traffic report will be submitted. The traffic worksheet, I guess, will be submitted. Original stipulation number 6, we're gonna change that date to June 12th. And then we can eliminate number 10. And then on the last stipulation, currently number 11, we're going to add that it will be provided to the city for review before the first CO. And then, Mr. Weber, did you want to, was there anything else you wanted to consider adding
No,
in terms of that?
no.
Okay.
Jesus Christ. Sorry.
It's all right.
What would number 2 say it again, what you wanted to have?
So I think, so right now, yeah, it's a waiver request, so I think it's just, that, let me just think about the timing of it, but,
Prior to building permit?
prior to building permit, okay. So that the traffic worksheet will be submitted prior to the issuance of a building permit.
Everybody ready? Like to make a motion?
Mr. Weber?
New business number 3, owner 75 Deerwood Drive LLC, located at 7 Deerwood Drive. That the plan meets NRO 190, 146D. Number 2 stipulation, actually, it'd be the first stipulation now. A traffic work report will be submitted prior to building permit. And
And now 3 and 4 as written, 5, prior to issuance of building permit, dated June 12th, 2017, 7, 8, 9, and now 10 as written.
And just to, can you just clarify which stipulations you're removing?
Removing existing 1 and 3, and 10.
And 10, okay, thank you. So, motion is by Mr. Weber to approve new business number 3, finding that it does meet the requirements outlined in site plan narrow section 190-146D. The total of 9 stipulations, with original stipulations 1, 3, and 10 having been removed, and original stipulation 2 renumbered as 1 and being reworded to indicate that the required traffic worksheet will be submitted prior to the issuance of a building permit, and the change in current stipulation number 6 to indicate June 12th, and then the last stipulation regarding the condominium ownership to be, the following language to be added at the end of the sentence before the first CO is issued. Is there a second to that motion? Second by Mr. Rapucci. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you to the board for hearing our case tonight, and thank you to the planning staff for all your help.
Thank you. Okay. Site plan, new business site plan case number 4 was withdrawn. New business site plan case number 5 postponed to the September 14th, 2017 meeting. So we're on to other business. Case number 1, review of tentative agenda to determine proposals of regional impact. Has anyone had an opportunity to review? Do we have a, I guess we have a, yeah, a technical review meeting?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
The 97 Daniel Webster Highway, there's a site plan for a car wash separate from a site plan for a gas station? So two different site plans?
Yeah, they actually have to, they got a subdivision approval last year, and they had to amend a site plan for 97 Daniel Webster Highway, which is Nashua Foreign Auto. But because that subdivision hasn't been recorded, this area for the gas station and the proposed car wash, we haven't been able to get them a new address yet, so that's why it's still on one, but yeah, it's a little confusing.
And then they have new lot lines, easements, and then there's a 93 Daniel Webster Highway, that's an adjacent property?
Yep, as part of that subdivision that was approved, they were supposed to come back in with a site plan and amend the lot lines for that as well.
You think they can do all of those 4 in one shot? Okay.
So is there, excuse me, a motion as to regional impact? Anyone have a motion on that? I don't see anything that appears to be.
I'll make a motion that there's no regional impact issues on the forthcoming agenda.
Motion by Mr. Rapucci that there are, having reviewed the agenda, there are no proposals of regional impact. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Mr. Peterson. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Nay, opposed? Motion passes. Okay, and then lastly, we have other business case number 2, referral from the Aldermanic Planning and Economic Development Committee seeking recommendation on an amendment by the committee to O-17-036, amending the accessory dwelling ordinance. And this had been tabled from the June 1st, 2017 meeting. And I was not at that meeting, but I understand from reading the minutes that there was some concern that they were going to have an interim meeting and they were potentially going to go back to the original language, so I don't know what this.
That's correct. It's actually going back to the Planning and Economic Development Committee next week.
Okay.
So depending whether they address some legal concerns that were raised in a memo that was given to the board. The board may not see it again, so since you've already recommended favorably on this ordinance in its present form, we don't know what's going to change. It may get referred back to the planning board by the full board of aldermen, depending on what the planning committee does with it. I know that's confusing. What was referred to you as part of this and at your last meeting was a referral from the Aldermanic Planning and Economic Development Committee, not the full board of aldermen.
Right.
Typically, when an ordinance goes to the aldermen, it gets referred to their own subcommittee, the Planning Economic Development Committee, and to the planning board. The planning board already acted on this, but the planning committee had some changes and they wanted to get the board's comments on it. That's what you have before you. And so they're re-looking at that based on some legal issues and some state law issues, and I think there might be some amendments to that. I don't know what those are yet, so stay tuned maybe on your July 13th meeting and just leave it on the table as it stands.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Yeah. So, I think we just need a motion to, actually, I guess we don't need to do anything.
No,
Just leave it
still on the table.
So,
We do nothing.
we don't need to do anything. We can do nothing, that's,
we do it so well.
Yes,
Right.
we do.
okay. Discussion items. Anything? Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
Mr. Pucci, motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes, and we are adjourned at 8:41.
What was the outcome?
The wedding?
Well, the wedding also.